It's now time to welcome the 2012 Republican presidential contenders. Joining us on stage, Texas Congressman Ron Paul. Former Massachusetts governor.
I am Ron Paul. I'm a congressman from Texas, 12 terms. I am the champion of a sound monetary system, a gold standard as it is under the Constitution, and a foreign policy based on strength, which rejects the notion that we should be the policemen of the world and that we should be a nation builder. We need...
Governor Paul, Congressman Paul, you're from Texas, the state with the longest border with Mexico. Is this a viable option, what we just heard?
Well, to talk about it, but I don't see it as being very practical. I think it's a much bigger problem. You can't deal with immigration without dealing with the economy. The weaker the economy, the more resentment that there is when illegals come in. If you have a healthy, vibrant economy, it's not a problem. We're usually looking for workers. Even under today's circumstances, a lot of businesses are looking for workers and they don't have them. They're not as well trained here. But also, the way we're handling our borders is actually hurting our economy because the business people, visitors have a hard time of coming in. I mean, we don't have a well-managed border. So I think we need more resources, and I think most of the other candidates would agree we need more resources. But where are the resources going to come from? I have a suggestion. I think we spend way too much time worrying about the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Use some of those resources on our own border.
Speaker Gingrich.
Joined by Raquel Rodriguez. She's an attorney in Miami. She practices business and international law, and she has a question for the candidates.
Yes, good evening. The U.S. has been largely away in its foreign and trade policy with Latin America. In the meantime, Iran and China have been increasing their influence over and involvement in Latin America through the leftist and left-leaning governments. What would each of you do as president to more deeply engage in Latin America and, importantly, to support the governments and the political parties that support democracy and free markets?
Congressman Paul.
Well, I think free trade is the answer. Free trade is an answer to a lot of conflicts around the world, so I'm always promoting free trade. And you might add Cuba, too. I think we'd be a lot better off with Cuba, trading with Cuba. So I think the more you can do to promote this free trade, the better off we'll be. But as far as us having an obligation, a military or a financial obligation to go down and dictate to them what government they should have, I don't like that idea. I would work with the people, encourage free trade, and try to set a standard here where countries in Central America or South America or any place in the world would want to emulate us and set the standards that we have. Unfortunately, sometimes we slip up on our standards and we go around the world and we try to force ourselves on others. I don't think the nations in South America and Central America necessarily want us to come down there and dictate which government they should have. And yet, I believe with friendship and trade, you can have a lot of influence, and I strongly believe that it's time we have friendship and trade with Cuba.
Senator Santorum, are you with Congressman Paul?
No, I'm not with Congressman Paul, and I'm not with Barack Obama on this issue. Our policy in Central and South America under this administration has been abysmal. The way we have treated, in particular, countries like Honduras. Honduras was stood up for the rule of law, which threw out a would-be dictator who was using the Chavez playbook from Venezuela in order to try to run for re-election in Honduras. And the United States government, instead of standing behind the pro-democracy, the people in the parliament, the people in the Supreme Court who tried to enforce the Constitution of Honduras, instead of siding with them, the Democrats, President Obama sided with two other people in South America, Central America and South America, Chavez and Castro and Obama, sided against the people of Honduras. This is a consistent policy of siding with the leftists, siding with the Marxists, siding with those who don't support democracy, not standing up for our friends in Colombia, not standing up for our friends who want to engage and support America, who want to be great trading partners and great allies for our country, to be able to form that kind of bond that is so essential in our own hemisphere. The European Union understood how important it was for diverse people to be able to come together in an economic unit. We not only have to come together as an economic unit, but the threat of terrorism, the threat of Iran now in Venezuela and in other places, in Cuba and in Nicaragua, the threat of radical Islam growing in that region. It's absolutely important for us to have a president who understands that threat and understands the solution is closer ties. I will visit that area of the world repeatedly to solidify those ties when I become president.
Let me let Congressman Paul quickly respond.
The senator mentions standing up for some of these nations, but he doesn't define it. But standing up for nations like this usually means that we impose ourselves, go and pick the dictators, undermine certain governments, also sending them a lot of money. It doesn't work. Most of the time this backfires. They resent us. We can achieve what he wants in a much different way than us using the bully attitude that you will do it our way. This is not a benefit to us. And besides, where are you going to get the troops and where are you going to get the money? Because you're talking about force. And I know of a much better way than using force to get along with people.
I don't know what answer Congressman Paul was listening to. He obviously wasn't listening to my answer.
Congressman Paul, then Senator Santorum. Quick follow-up question to you, but specifically, it seems that they both acknowledge they both made money from Fannie and Freddie. Should they return that money?
That subject really doesn't interest me a whole lot. But the question does. The question is, what are we going to do about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac? It should have been auctioned off right after the crash came. It would have been cleansed by now. It should have been sold. But maybe it's my physician background, but I think an ounce of prevention is what we ought to talk about, so we quit doing this. But we know how the bubble came about. It was excessive credit, interest rates held too low, too long, the Federal Reserve responsible for that. Community Reinvestment Act, which is affirmative action telling banks they have to make these risky loans. At the same time, there was a line of credit which allowed Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to, to make more money. And it was assumed that they would always be protected. Now, you can't argue. I've talked a long time about cutting off that credit from the Fed. I was trying to prevent this stuff. Also, I opposed Community Reinvestment Act, as well as I had legislation in 10 years before the bust came to remove that line of credit to the Fed, to the Treasury. So,
Senator Santorum, are you with Ronald Reagan as far as the tax rates, as Senator Santorum has suggested, Congressman Paul?
No, he taxed too much. My goal is to get rid of the 16th Amendment. And the only way you can do that, is not run a welfare system and a warfare system and policing the world. But I do want to address this subject about taxing the rich. That is not a solution. But I understand and really empathize with the people who talk about the 99 and the 1, because there's a characteristic about what happens when you destroy a currency. There is a transfer of wealth from the middle class to the wealthy, and this has been going on for 40 years. So the middle class is shrinking, they're getting poorer, and they're losing their jobs, and they're losing their houses. But Wall Street isn't getting poorer, and they are the ones who are getting the bailout. So we have to address the bailout and the system that favors a certain group over another group. If you don't have sound money and if you have a welfare state, no matter whether the welfare state is designed to help the poor, the welfare system helps the wealthy. And there has been this transfer of wealth. So if we could stop all of these transfers to the wealthy class, but the solution isn't to tax the wealthy. If you give an honest product and the customers buy that product, you deserve to keep that money and earn that money, but there's a big difference between those who earn money and those who rip us off through the government and the monetary system.
Congressman Paul, you're a physician, you're 76 years old, you would be the oldest president of the United States if you were elected. Are you prepared to release your medical records so voters out there know what your health is?
Obviously, because it's about one page, if even that long. But I'm willing to I'm willing to challenge any of these gentlemen up here to a 25-mile bike ride any time of the day in the heat of Texas. And you know, that subject has come up, and sometimes in fun, but sometimes not in fun. But, you know, there are laws against age discrimination, so if you push this too much, you better be careful.
I raised the question because you remember 4 years ago, the same question came up with John McCain. Congressman Paul, Texas, the space program, very important there as well. Where do you stand on this?
Well, I don't think we should go to the moon. I think we maybe should send some politicians up there at times. But I went into the Air Force in 1962 and studied aerospace medicine. Actually had a daydream about maybe becoming the first physician to go into space. That didn't occur, but I see space, the amount of money we spend on space, the only part that I would vote for is for national defense purposes, not to explore the moon and go to Mars. I think that's fantastic. I love those ideas. But I also don't like the idea of building government-business partnerships. If we had a healthy economy and had more Bill Gateses and more Warren Buffetts, the money would be there. It should be privatized. And the people who work in the industry, if you had that, there would be jobs in aerospace. And I just think that we don't need a bigger and newer program. When you think of the people, I mean, healthcare or something else deserves a lot more priority than going to the moon. So I would be very reluctant. But space technology should be followed up to some degree for national defense purposes, but not just for the fun of it and, you know, for scientific.
We're going to leave this subject, but before we do, we're going to move on, but go ahead, Ron Paul.
I want to make a quick comment, because Newt's mentioned this quite a few times about balancing the budget for 4 times. I went back and looked at the record. The budget was, the national debt during those 4 years actually went up about $1 trillion. What he's talking about is he doesn't count the money he takes out of Social Security. So Reagan nor you had a truly balanced budget, because the national debt goes up, and that's what we pay the interest on. So I think you've stretched out a little bit more than you should have.
Go ahead and respond, and then Senator Santorum.
No,
you want to respond to Congressman Paul?
I would just say, under the system that was used, we were $405 billion in balance for 4 years. I agree with Ron, but let me finish. I actually agree with you, and I propose that we take Social Security off budget, so no president can ever again threaten, as Obama did in August, that he would not send the check out. And you could set Social Security back up as a freestanding trust fund. It does have enough money, and you could, in fact, pay the checks without regard to politics in Washington.
Go ahead, quickly.
My name is Lynn Frazier, and I live here in Jacksonville. And for the Republican presidential candidates, my question is, I'm currently unemployed, and I've found myself unemployed for the first time in 10 years and unable to afford health care benefits. What type of hope can you promise me and others in my position?
Let's ask Congressman Paul.
Well, it's a tragedy, because this is a consequence of the government being involved in medicine since 1965. When I was growing up, we didn't have a whole lot, but my dad had a small insurance, but medical care costs weren't that much. And you should have an opportunity. Medical care insurance should be given to you as an individual. So if you're employed or not employed, you just take care of that and you keep it up. When you lose a job, sometimes you lose your insurance. But the cost is so high. When you pump money into something like housing, costs and prices go up. If you pump money into education, the cost of education goes up. When the government gets involved in medicine, you don't get better care. You get cost goes up, and it distorts the economy. It leads to a crisis. But your medical care should go with you. You should get total deduction on it. It would be so much less expensive. It doesn't solve every single problem, but you're suffering from the consequence of way too much government and the cost going up, because government has inflated the cost, and we have a government-created recession, and that is a consequence of the business cycle.
Speaker Gingrich, what should Lynn do? Paul, who's right?
I think they're all wrong. I think This is a typical result of when you get government involved, because all you're arguing about is which form of government you want. They have way too much confidence in government sorting this out. So I would say there's a much better way, and that is allow the people to make their decisions and not get the government involved. You know, it's only been... when I started medicine, there was no Medicare or Medicaid, and nobody was out in the streets without it. Now people are suffering. There are all the complaints going on. So the government isn't our solution. So I'm not too happy with this type of debate, trying to blame one versus the other. But most likely, we're going to continue to have this problem unless we straighten out the economy.
I'll give you 30 seconds.
Cut the spending. And they talk about these no programs and all. But how many of the other candidates are willing to cut anything? Right. I'm willing to cut $1 trillion out of the first year.
All right. No, I just want to say that I actually think if you look at what Ron Paul's background is as a doctor, and you look at medicine in the early 60s, and you look at how communities solve problems, it was a fundamentally more flexible and less expensive system, and there's a lot to be said for rethinking from the ground up the entire approach to health care.
Let's go to Miami. We have another question. CNN Español's Juan Carlos.
I don't have one particular name that I'm going to bring up, but my litmus test would be to get individuals, Hispanic or otherwise, to understand monetary policy and understand the system. But also the Hispanic community is especially attuned to the foreign policy of non-intervention. They are more opposed to war than other communities, so I would think there's plenty in the Hispanic community that could give me good advice and an understanding of why a non-intervention foreign policy is very attractive to the Hispanic people.
All right, gentlemen, stand by. Much more to discuss. I want to take a short break. We have many. First, on a lighter subject, I want to ask each of these gentlemen why they think their wife would make a great first lady. Congressman Paul.
Well, she's been my wife for 54 years, and we're going to have an anniversary on February 1st.
Congratulations.
So, she's the mother of 5 of our children, and she's a grandmother of 18 grandchildren, does an excellent job, and she's also the author of a very famous cookbook, the Ron Paul Cookbook. So,
Governor? I got to take a look. Congressman Paul, you said the U.S. should talk to everyone. Imagine you're in the Oval Office. You speak to Raul Castro. What would you say to him?
Well, I'd ask him what he called about, you know. What was the purpose of his call? No, I would ask him, what can we do to improve relations? Because I wouldn't see them as likely to attack us. When I was drafted in October of '62, that was a different world. I mean, there were nuclear weapons in Cuba. That was a different story. But today, not to talk to them and take the call and see what you can work out, helps Castro. It hurts the people, the dissidents, the people who want to overthrow him have always had to be, you know, nationalistic and unified behind the leader. So as well-intended as these sanctions are, they almost inevitably backfire, and they help the dictators and hurt the people. So it's time to change. The Cold War is over. They're not going to invade us, and I just think that a better relationship and trade relationship, so many people, I think I've noticed already, and since I've been talking about this issue the last 4 or 5 years, I think the people have changed their mind. The American people are getting much more open, not nearly as frightened. People, I don't think they see a jihadist under the bed every night, and we have to worry about that. I think I worry about overreaction and overconcern and lack of ability to talk to them when they call you.
I want both of you to weigh in, Governor.
My question, how would your religious beliefs, if you're elected, impact the decisions that you make in the office of the presidency?
Congressman Paul?
Well, my religious beliefs wouldn't affect it. My religious beliefs affects my character and the way I treat people and the way I live. The only thing that would affect... The only thing that would affect me in the way I operate as a president or a congressman is my oath of office and my promises that I've made to the people.
Governor? Here's the question, and it involves the President of the United States. I want you to tell voters who are watching or are here on this campus right now why you are the one person on this stage that is most likely to beat Barack Obama. Congressman.
Well, you know, so far we have some pretty good evidence that I'll do quite well and have a better chance than the rest to beat him, because if you do a national poll, I do very, very well against Obama. But one of the reasons is that the freedom message in the Constitution is very appealing to everybody in all political beliefs, because it includes free markets, which conservatives endorse, but it also protects civil liberties, the way people run their lives. If it is a God-given life and it's your life, you should have the right to run your life as you so choose, as long as you don't hurt other people. This means a lot more tolerance than some would like to give. So that brings people in who are concerned about civil liberties, and all of a sudden, my position undermines Obama completely and totally, because the foreign policy is different. He promises to end the wars, but the wars expand. A constitutional foreign policy will end the wars, and if you want somebody to talk about peace and prosperity, it has to be somebody who understands money and a foreign policy and free markets.
Governor Romney, why are you the one person on